Fire Emblem is a franchise that was started by Intelligent Systems and was the first game in the franchise, being released in 1990. Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon, and the Blade of Light. The game was not released in the West. It was deemed to not sell well in Western countries. It wasn't until 2003 where Western countries would get their first Fire Emblem game, being Fire Emblem 7. Or just being known as Fire Emblem in the West. What led to this Fire Emblem legacy in the West was their inclusion in Super Smash Bros. Melee, which was released in 2001. Marth and Roy were the first characters for the Fire Emblem franchise to be represented in Smash Bros. Ironically, they were originally meant to be Japanese-only exclusive characters, but the development team decided against this and kept them in for the release for Super Smash Bros. Melee in all other countries. They kept their Japanese voices, and most people, including myself, had no idea who these characters were and why they were in a Super Smash Bros. Game. That piqued interest for Fire Emblem to be released in the West for their 7th installment. Masahiro Sakurai, the creator and director of every Super Smash Bros. Game in the franchise, is a huge fan of Fire Emblem, and wanted Marth to be in the game to represent one of his favorite franchises. Then he put in Roy as a clone character of Marth to help push sales of Fire Emblem 6, which was the game that Roy was starring in at the time. Fast forward to more Fire Emblem games coming out in the West. Super Smash Bros. Brawl comes out in 2008 and removes Roy as a character and adds in Ike. A franchise is still at 2 characters representation-wise. The franchise was seeing some mild success at this point, but sales-wise, the games weren't smash hits. Hardcore fans really loved the games, but it was hard for casual audiences to really gravitate towards the Fire Emblem franchise. Leading up to 2011, Intelligent Systems stated that the franchise was on life support, and it was going to lead to the shutdown of the franchise if the game didn't do well commercially. And if you guys know a thing or two about Fire Emblem, you know that this game was Fire Emblem Awakening, and this game sold very well. The game got reviewed well by critics, and it was one of the best-selling Fire Emblem games of all time, not only in Japan but also in the West as well. It led to the franchise that potentially could have been dead to basically being a fore-front Nintendo IP. To this day, there's many sequels and many other games in the franchise. I'm sure you guys have probably played them at this point. The series is very big, even in the West now. That's really a Cliff Note version of what happened with the Fire Emblem franchise. It could really warrant its own video, but because of Awakening's success, Fire Emblem got 2 new characters in Smash Bros. Super Smash Bros. 4. Those characters being Robin and Lucina. Roy was added back in as DLC, and not only that, they got another DLC fighter, being Corrin, at the end of Super Smash Bros. 4's lifespan. Corrin was added in to represent Fire Emblem Fates, which was the game that he was starring in at the time. So before I get in the point of this video, I just wanted to preface a few things. I don't hate the Fire Emblem franchise. I actually love Fire Emblem. It's one of my favorite Nintendo IPs, and I love Smash Bros. too. This is going to be a little more of a controversial take, but I hope you guys can, hear me out. You can debate me in the comments if you want or whatever. So let's get right into this. Super Smash Bros. Melee and Brawl had 2 Fire Emblem characters in each game. To represent how the franchise was probably in a more smaller end of things, they didn't have a lot of characters. Smash 4, the franchise began to get bigger, so they had 4 characters at launch and ended with 6. Them ending with 6 characters means there's more Fire Emblem characters in Smash 4 than there are Zelda characters. So let me just preface that. And now we get to the point of Smash Ultimate where there's 8 Fire Emblem characters. Yes, there's 8 Fire Emblem characters. That's just as many Pokemon characters as there is Fire Emblem characters. Usually the more characters a franchise has in Smash Bros., it's meant to represent how big that franchise is. For example, Mario and Pokemon and Zelda were normally the 3 franchises that had the most amount of characters. I'm not saying Fire Emblem didn't deserve the growth that they had in characters. The franchise obviously got a lot bigger in the 2010s. So them getting 4 to 6 characters isn't that dumb of an idea. But now at this point there's more Fire Emblem characters than there is Zelda characters. My main issue though isn't strictly the number of characters in the game. It really is just the characters that they choose and how they are handled in the franchise that is my main issue. Every Fire Emblem character in Smash Bros. At this point is either a clone character of an existing Fire Emblem character, They wield swords, or they're just there to advertise some game in the franchise. Not every character falls under this blank, and even if a character does fall under what I just said, it doesn't mean they're strictly a bad character. It's just that's why they're there in the game. Clone characters are added into the game just to save on development time, which I understand. I'm not saying because of clone characters in Smash Brothers they should be removed and the game sucks, yada yada yada. It's just that's why they're there. Robin, I feel like, is the one Fire Emblem character that does really well representing what he's supposed to be. He uses magic and a sword, but his sword isn't like a falchion, or he really feels like his own character, and that's what I like the most about him. Ike, in my opinion, is also a very well designed character. Marth is meant to be more graceful and more of a stabbing sword style, where Ike is just going to hit you with his giant blunt sword. It feels original enough to me. Hell, I can kind of even give an exception for Roy, because I feel over each Smash game that he's been in, he's been kind of added things here and there that make him different from Marth. And I respect that. My main issue with the Fire Emblem character is not their inclusion in the game. I'm fine with Chrom, Lucina, Roy, Corrin. I don't mind their existence. But it's how they're handled that I feel is the real problem with their characters. Like I said earlier, I know a lot of these characters aren't made with too much effort in mind. A lot of them, like Chrom, are included for fan requests or because they're simply very popular, but I'm simply getting tired of the same thing over and over again. Put in a character like Hector in the game, or put in a pure magic user. I feel the franchise can be represented in different ways than just the same sword character over and over again. One of my first points being that the characters in the franchise lack originality. 4 of the 5 Fire Emblem characters are clones of Marth. That is half of the Fire Emblem characters represented in Smash Brothers. Chrom is a clone of Roy, and Lucina is a clone of Marth. Of course, we could go back further and even say Roy was a clone of Marth at one point. Fire Emblem is a franchise that is known for a diverse cast of characters that use a variety of weapons. Not just swords, but lances, axes, magic, gauntlets, horses, Pegasus, and dragons. Not saying we need anything and everything represented in Smash, but it feels disingenuous for what Fire Emblem represents. Don't get me wrong, there are characters like Robin, and I like Robin. He uses magic, but he still uses a sword as well. And I know you guys are probably wondering, what about Byleth? I haven't talked about Byleth yet. I'll get to him a little bit later. There's not a single character in Smash Brothers that just uses an axe. There's not a single character that just uses a lance. Those playstyles would be unique and a breath of fresh air for the franchise that are just clones of Marth and use a sword. Every now and then you get a character that maybe uses a sword differently from Marth, where they maybe don't stab with it, or they're hitting with it more powerfully, or like for example Corrin has dragon powers but still uses a sword. Although I would give Ike an exception, at least he plays somewhat differently from Marth. Both Corrin and Robin and Ike feel like they're their own characters, but they still fall under the umbrella of using the sword. Call it a nitpick, but it always bothered me. It only has gotten worse over time for each game in this franchise for Smash Brothers. Now, I'm not saying they need to grab every random Fire Emblem character and just have them fill the role of using an axe or a lance. I'm not saying that, but the point of each Fire Emblem character is to represent the franchise and have fan favorites. It doesn't make it nearly as interesting when they introduce a new character and they play similarly to a previously established character in the franchise. It's like if every Pokemon character in Smash was a fire type, it would probably get annoying after a while. Like I said earlier, I know why these characters are included. Mainly they're included because they're supposed to represent a game in the franchise, or they're highly requested, but just because they're highly requested doesn't mean you should put them in the game and just make them simply a clone of another character. And I know clones are usually added last minute, or they're added as more of a cherry on top on the actual base game, but it kind of ruins it when a character like Lucina or Chrom could have their own unique moveset in some sort of way. Alright, so let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that elephant being Byleth. Byleth was added in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate in 2019 as DLC, and the main drama that surrounded this character was not only it being another Fire Emblem character, but it was another Fire Emblem character with a sword. I know it's not really a sword, it sort of acts like a whip that kind of makes him similar to maybe a Belmont character in a way, but oh, he uses an axe, he uses a lance in one of his moves, oh, But really, Byleth isn't really a faithful interpretation of what an axe fighter would be, or a lance fighter. They just seemed like tacked on moves to his moveset in order to shut people up. If you think that like this is an authentic axe wielding character or a lance wielding character, then you're probably the same person who thinks Taco Bell is authentic Mexican food. It's lazy game design in my opinion, and the like to dislike ratio on this character shows that it's probably one of the most controversial characters added in the franchise. So in my personal opinion, I think Byleth's moveset lacks any character originality, and oh cool, another Fire Emblem character with hard-hitting moves. That hasn't been done before, I'm sure, but Byleth is different. He has cool weapons. I really don't think that's a valid argument for him being there. No one wants to play as another Fire Emblem character that lacks any originality. If they were going to add a Fire Emblem character from the newest game, I'm fine with it, but why not Dimitri or Edelgard? Or maybe grab an old fan favorite character that people will recognize. Why do we always get the same sword-wielding playable protagonist character that we already have plenty of in Smash? I don't care that on one or two of his moves he pulls out an axe or a lance. He doesn't actually play like any of those characters should play like. I can maybe see what they were going for with Byleth, a more weapon master, monster hunter type character, than a character that fills the niche of like a lance fighter or an axe character, but it still kind of comes off as cheap in my opinion. In fact, I guarantee including those weapons in his moveset was probably recommended to Sakurai because the amount of people saying how there's anime sword fighters in Smash, and it's basically becoming a meme at this point. It's not even really surprising at this point. It seems like whenever there's a new Fire Emblem game, whatever face you see first in that trailer, they'd probably be the next character in Smash. In fact, mark my words, you heard it here first, the next Fire Emblem game is probably going to have a character that's going to be in Smash as well, and it'll be another blank-faced, sword-wielding protagonist with some gimmick. I mean, mark my words, it'll probably happen. You heard it here first. But who knows, maybe Nintendo will listen this time around. He's the most disliked character of all the DLC fighters out there, so maybe things will change in the future. Who knows? I'm open to it, but that's pretty much it for this video.